Hour for investors in 2018. Squawk Box tomorrow, CNBC.
Welcome back to Fast Money. Bitcoin just keeps surging, but a number of regulators could be gearing up to crack down on the cryptocurrency. Bob Pisani's at the NYSE with more. Hi, Bob.
Hello, Melissa. The list of regulators worrying about the perils of investing in cryptocurrencies is long, and it's getting longer. Just last week, in response to a rash of companies claiming to suddenly becoming cryptocurrency companies, FINRA told investors to be wary of cryptocurrency stock purchases from aggressive cold callers, even if the claims sound plausible, particularly if the recommended stocks are very low priced. And 2 weeks ago, SEC Chairman Jay Clayton also warned against investors putting money into cryptocurrencies, saying the SEC has not yet approved any initial coin offerings or ETFs holding cryptocurrencies. None. And even the regulators of Bitcoin futures, the CFTC, admit they don't regulate the spot or cash market for cryptocurrencies, and that some of these currency platforms may be missing critical system safeguards and other customer protection systems and may be vulnerable to hacks and theft of virtual currency, and indeed have been. Then there's William F. Galvin. He's the Secretary of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, who warned investors several weeks ago, just as futures trading in Bitcoin began, that, quote, because trading on the CBOE gives Bitcoin an air of legitimacy, investors must be aware of the inherent risks of investing in Bitcoin and the fraudulent schemes associated with it. Is Bitcoin completely unregulated? You know, not entirely. Exchanges are licensed by states. So Coinbase, for example, is licensed by the state of New York, and they are subject to state laws that govern financial transactions. And there's also common law fraud statutes that exist out there. There's also Know Your Customer and anti-money laundering laws that may also apply here. And if this gets much bigger, Melissa, you can expect regulators on both the state and the local level to get a lot more involved. Back to you.
Absolutely. Bob, thank you. Well, as Bob had mentioned, the state of Massachusetts issued a warning on Bitcoin earlier this month. Now, interestingly enough, the state made a similar move back in the early 80s when Apple went public, citing the tech company as a danger to investors. You know how that story goes. But will they be right this time around? Let's bring in the man behind the Bitcoin warning, Massachusetts Secretary of the Commonwealth, William Galvin. Mr. Secretary, thanks so much for joining Fast Money. We do appreciate it.
Happy to be with you.
We highlighted the statement that your office made in the 80s about Apple for one reason, and that is what makes your office.
I wasn't in office at that time.
Of course. But yeah. What makes your office qualified to give investors advice about a specific kind of security?
Well, because it doesn't pass the smell test. There is no product. Even the example you're providing of Apple, there was at least a theory of a product. There is no product here. This is entirely speculation. That's already been proven by the wild gyrations of the value. It's also subject to manipulation because no one can explain it, no one can control it, no one can explain exactly where and when, from whence the profits are going or coming. This is clearly a bubble. There's no question about that. It is a bubble. It is being fed by the frenzy that people believe they're going to make money by simply investing in this. We've seen this. We've seen bubbles for centuries. This certainly qualifies. There's a very interesting piece today in Wonk Blog by a guy named Matt O'Brien, who I don't know, but he makes the point that by simply adding the word blockchain to your name, a company totally unrelated could go up. So I think it proves it's a bubble and a wild mania.
Aren't these two separate issues, though? You're warning specifically on Bitcoin, and what you're talking about sounds to me like fraud. When a company whose main product may be, say, a beverage, like iced tea, adds blockchain to the name, and this is an actual real-life example. Long Island Iced Tea is the company. It became Long Blockchain, and it saw the stock surge after that without really having much of an investment or any revenues tied to any sort of blockchain technology. Isn't that fraud, and that is separate from issuing a warning specifically on Bitcoin? Or it could be fraud. But
well, that could be, and we may look at it. But I spoke to Bitcoin because there is no there with Bitcoin. It is a concept. And what we said very clearly is that if you didn't understand it, if you weren't susceptible, or if you weren't able to accept the risk that it inherently had, do not invest in it. If you think you understand it and you are in a position to take the risk, you're free to do that if you want. But we've seen too many average investors get sucked in by the mania about these things, believing they're losing out on something and lose their money in the past. So we've had plenty of bubbles in the past. We think this is a bubble.
Your office has been in the forefront of actions on behalf of the investor and protecting the investor. So are you taking a look at bringing any actions, whether it be against an exchange or any companies specifically?
The short answer is yes. Obviously, there are some ICOs out there that's so-called initial coin offerings. We believe they certainly qualify as a security. We're also seeing the bundling of investments in Bitcoin by various instruments. They could well constitute something our office would look at. Bitcoin itself allegedly is a currency, and so since it's a currency, we would not have direct jurisdiction over the currency. Although, as the report that led into this interview provided, there are other regulators who, I might add, don't always agree, but we all seem to agree that this is a problem.
Are you working with other regulatory agencies, for instance, perhaps the CFTC or the SEC in terms of enforcement? You are not. Okay,
not at this time, but we have worked before with them, and certainly if the opportunity presents itself, we may. We're just interested in protecting our investors right now.
Sure. And it may not be under your jurisdiction because maybe some other regulatory agencies govern it specifically at this point in time, but are there areas in this whole emerging industry that concern you when it comes to investor protection?
Yes, as you've already pointed out, we have several examples where people are trying to adopt the lingo of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies to try to enhance the value of stocks that have nothing to do with it. We have various instruments being supposedly presented as having Bitcoin investments, which are of concern to us. We have these so-called ICOs, where initial coin offerings, not even Bitcoin, other entities that are of concern to us. This is clearly an area that is ripe with the potential for fraud, and we're very concerned about that, and we don't want to see investors make the mistake of getting in here if they are getting into something that's fraudulent.
All right, Mr. Galvin, thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it.
My pleasure.
William Galvin, the Secretary of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. He said that this industry is in his crosshairs. This is the next sort of, I don't want to say shoe to drop, but this has always been a concern for Bitcoin investors. What could that regulation
So I would say
like?
a couple things. I'd say for those coins that are on Coinbase, they are regulated, like he said, by states,
Right.
everything like that. That's fantastic. Okay, what he's talking about in ICOs, he's talking about all these other currencies they're trading on, all these other exchanges. They all should be regulated. You, as somebody interested in this, should feel good about that regulation's there. It's there to protect you. The one thing I will disagree with him about is that when you think about Bitcoin, it is not a fraud. I mean, it is the first permanent, global, decentralized ledger of records. That is the use case for blockchain. That's what it's being, right there. So that exists. There is, he said there's no there. That's the there.
Well, and it's legitimate because concept or tangible, I mean, there's something that people can actually invest or you call it speculate in. So the reality is that the CFTC and the SEC don't necessarily have jurisdiction in the underlying, but they do in securities that are based on the underlying. And I think it's great that we're getting more of that. In fact, that's what those guys are there to do. And I think they're having a difficult time watching the underlying do whatever it wants to do.
And by the way, the CFTC does not have jurisdiction over the underlying commodity on which a lot of their
that's my point.
The corn market, for instance, they don't regulate the corn market, but corn futures.
And you know what? We have seen areas of the market in the past where we've absolutely seen volatility that's absolutely outrageous. We've seen it constantly. So I don't know that that was a great point, but I loved what he actually said. One specific line, which was people must understand the risks. And he's trying to protect the folks that are out there.
And that goes for any investment.
Absolutely. I was about to say that's the way everything should be.
But this is pets.com. I mean, this is no different than anybody slapping.com. There was a movement going on. This is a movement. This is a generational thing that people are behind. It's not a surprise.
Still ahead. Well, everyone has been focused on Bitcoin mining. Quietly, real mining stocks have been breaking out. But have any of these names come too far too fast? We will explain. Plus, Pete has been on